Herzlich willkommen zu einem Maischberger die Woche extra. Heute mit einem der faszinierendsten Menschen dieser Welt. Er hat in seiner Garage den Weltkonzern Microsoft gegründet und erfunden und damit hat er nichts weniger getan, als unser tägliches Arbeiten zu revolutionieren. Er wurde damit der reichste Mensch dieses Planeten. Und jetzt sorgt er sich um eben diesen Planeten. In der Stiftung, die er und seine Frau gegründet haben, möchte er die schlimmsten Krankheiten dieser Welt bekämpfen, Malaria, aber eben auch Corona. Und er möchte die, wie er sagt, schlimmste Bedrohung für uns Menschen bekämpfen, nämlich den Klimawandel. In seinem neuen Buch beschreibt er nun, wie wir die Klimakatastrophe verhindern können. Und darüber wollen wir heute mit ihm selbst sprechen. Herzlich willkommen nach Seattle. Guten Abend, Bill Gates.
Great to talk to you.
Herr Gates, Sie sind einer der berühmtesten und bekanntesten Menschen dieser Welt. Sollten Sie dennoch mal jemandem begegnen, der Sie nicht kennt, wie würden Sie sich vorstellen? Also wer Sie sind und was Sie so tun?
Well, I had my software career that was fantastic and gave me the resources now to have the foundation career, which is focused on, as you said, the infectious diseases and making sure children everywhere don't die before the age of 5. And that work, gave us a lot of expertise in infectious diseases. So, we're very involved in trying to end the coronavirus pandemic. But now I have the additional focus to make sure we get to work on the innovations around climate change.
Über beides werden wir heute sprechen. Wir alle kommen im Moment überhaupt nicht dazu, überhaupt jemanden zu treffen. Wie strikt sind Sie in der Anwendung dieser Maßnahmen? Wann haben Sie zum letzten Mal jemanden umarmt, außer Ihrer Frau vielleicht?
Well, our foundation offices, we left them over 10 months ago, and nobody's been in that office since then. So it's really quite amazing that we're still able to do our work. We actually seen our kids more than we expected, and so at least that part's been nice.
Ihre Kinder sind, glaube ich, zwischen 18 und 24 Jahren alt. Das ist der Moment im Leben, wo man rausgehen möchte, ein Leben beginnen. Wie gehen Sie denn mit dieser Situation um?
For their education, they're lucky that the schools they're working with are doing a great job with the online learning. But their social life, they miss that sort of normal, just hanging out with friends. And so they're always asking me, hey, when is this thing going to end? Get those factories going. And I tell them I'm doing my best.
Und was sagen Sie denn, wann das wieder aufhört?
Well, we need to get the production of the best vaccines up into the billions. And all the way back in May, we started working with the Indian vaccine manufacturers who have actually the biggest factories because they make vaccines for all the developing countries. And so, it looks like we'll be able to scale up the Johnson & Johnson and Novavax, which are quite effective even against the variants. But it's requiring immense cooperation to get all these things pulled together. And, we're lucky to have the vaccines, but now we need to make enough for the entire planet.
Und wir müssen sie so machen, dass sie auch für die Mutationen noch effektiv genug sind. Also was glauben Sie, wann sind wir mit dieser Pandemie durch? 2021, 2022?
Yeah, it's interesting. Our foundation funded trials in South Africa. The companies didn't really have a reason for that, but we thought there needed to be trials somewhere in Africa, and that's where they could be run the best. Also, we wanted to understand, did the vaccines work for people who are living with HIV? And these are the trials that showed us that there is some reduction in effectiveness of the vaccine. Still quite effective in the Novavax and Johnson & Johnson case, but we may, just to be sure, want to tune the vaccine against these variants that'll take 4 or 5 months. So in rich countries, we should be largely done by the end of this year. But for the rest of the world, it's going to take a lot of generosity, which Germany's involved in this COVAX effort and very generous now, the US joining that as well. So, if we handle it right, the entire world should be done by 2022.
Deutschland wird sehr stark kritisiert dafür, dass wir mit unserem Impftempo so langsam sind. Was glauben Sie, haben wir falsch gemacht? Was hat Donald Trump offensichtlich richtig gemacht, was die Impfkapazität angeht?
Well, the one thing the US did well, the only thing, was the gigantic funding of the vaccine research and trials and manufacturing. That was a group called BARDA that had been created earlier, although President Trump renamed it. In that case, the U.S. was the best. In every other respect, like getting diagnostics up early, having clear messages about masks, the U.S. did very poorly, which is why its death rate is one of the highest in the world. Germany did better on a lot of these things, although the wave you're going through now, I know is very, very difficult.
Mr. Gates, Sie haben gerade eben vor wenigen Wochen getwittert und ein Bild gezeigt, wie Sie selber eben geimpft werden. Es gibt eine Menge Menschen, die haben Angst vor diesen so schnell entwickelten Impfstoffen, weil sie sagen, wir wissen viel zu wenig über die Langzeitfolgen. Können Sie diese Angst verstehen?
Well, vaccines always are controversial, which is too bad, because vaccines are a tool that have saved so many lives, even eradicated smallpox. Our foundation is pushing the final eradication of polio. And these vaccines, have gone through very rigorous safety trials. The US regulator, UK, European regulator. So I hope that people listen to people they trust, because to benefit all of society, we need to get quite a high vaccination level to make sure that the transmission in the community gets stopped. So, right now we have supply problems, we have logistic problems, but eventually this demand, this acceptance issue will be the key issue to end the pandemic.
In Deutschland wird die Debatte geführt, ob die Akzeptanz mit einer Impfpflicht vielleicht verstärkt werden sollte. Wie stehen Sie zu diesem Thema?
Well, the goal is to get a lot of people to be willing to be vaccinated. Sometimes mandatory policies can work. Sometimes they backfire, because then it feels like, well, why are you forcing me to do this? So each country has to decide, how to get that acceptance. You really want to go to who people trust. Is it religious leaders? Is it scientific leaders? Because the evidence is there. And, with vaccines, the non-factual stuff often is titillating, excites people, and yet the record for vaccines overall is that they've saved more lives than any other tool.
Wie geht man gegen Gerüchte vor? Ihre Polio-Kampagne, Sie hatten sich ja zum Ziel gesetzt, Kinderlähmung weltweit auszurotten und waren auf einem sehr guten Weg. Und plötzlich stockte die Kampagne in einem Land wie Nigeria, weil dort plötzlich das Gerücht aufkam, diese Impfung würde am Ende dazu führen, dass die Menschen unfruchtbar sind. Wie geht man gegen solche Gerüchte vor, erfolgreich?
Yeah, that's a great example, because we went to the religious leaders there, and we went through how the vaccine was made, and they gained trust in it, and so they were vaccinating their children, and we made that very visible to the broad population. And so that was the trust hierarchy that came in, and people said, okay, it must be safe. Our leaders are giving it to their very own children.
Mr. Gates, ich weiß nicht, ob Ihnen das bewusst ist. In Deutschland haben Sie viele, die Sie als Helden ansehen, eben weil Sie eine Krankheit wie die Kinderlähmung fast ausgerottet haben. Aber es gibt auch Menschen, die in Ihnen ein Feindbild erkennen. Es gibt Demonstrationen, da sind Sie abgebildet in einem Sträflingsanzug. Und es gibt Menschen, die sagen, sie wollen sich nicht impfen lassen, weil Sie, Bill Gates, mit diesen Impfungen Mikrochips implantieren wollen, um die Menschen besser zu überwachen. Was würden Sie solchen Menschen sagen?
Well, it's hard to understand why I would want surveillance, or what's the connection between chips and vaccines. I don't get that. Some of these conspiracy theories have focused on either myself or Dr. Fauci, which is kind of ironic because he and I are doing our best to get the vaccine production up and make sure that's done in an equitable way. And so, some things are so far out, it's hard to know how to respond to them.
Es gibt zwei Kritikpunkte. Der eine kommt daher, dass man ihnen vorwirft, dass sie letztlich dann durch diese Impfkampagnen Produktionen und Firmen nach vorne bringen, in denen sie investiert sind. Das heißt also, sie machen Profit mit dem, was sie mit diesen Impfkampagnen wollen. Ist das denn ganz falsch?
Well, all my vaccine work is completely charitable. And we do partner, for example, in Germany, we've provided resources to BioNTech, to CureVac, which are two of the pioneers of the mRNA approach that over a decade ago we identified as having great potential. If any of those things make money, then we just buy more vaccines. Our foundation is saving children's lives for less than $1,000 per life saved. And so, all of our resources are going to that. My wealth is going down every year because the foundation is now giving out a lot of money. That's great. That's our goal is to end infectious disease.
Ein zweiter Grund liegt ein bisschen tiefer, weil es bekannt ist, dass Sie die Überbevölkerung für eines der größten Schwierigkeiten und der größten Probleme des Planeten halten. Und Sie investieren im medizinischen Fortschritt, auch eben in Impfungen. Wenn Sie damit erfolgreich sind, wird doch die Bevölkerung erst recht wachsen. Ist das nicht ein Widerspruch?
This is the most important thing to know about our work, which is that when children survive, parents choose voluntarily to have less kids. There are no countries in the world where they have good health and population growth. All the population growth is in places where so many kids are dying that parents need to have a lot of kids to try to make sure some will survive to adulthood to support them in their old age. And so the miracle is that by saving those lives, the voluntary actions will actually reduce that population growth. Africa is the last place where there's still very high population growth because we haven't done a good enough job saving those children's lives. But as we brought it down from 10 million a year dying to 5 million a year now, that will bring the population growth down, even though more kids survive. So it seems like a paradox, but it's the most amazing positive thing I've ever learned.
Sie beschäftigen sich schon Jahrzehnten in diesem Bereich. Ihre Rede auf der TED-Conference von 2015 ist mittlerweile legendär geworden. Damals haben Sie gesagt, nicht eine Atombombe wird unser großes Problem sein, nächstes Problem sein, sondern eben ein Virus. Und dann haben Sie eine Menge Dinge vorgeschlagen, die man tun müsste weltweit, um einer Pandemie vorzubeugen. Ganz wenig davon oder fast gar nichts ist umgesetzt worden. Wie frustrierend ist das für Sie?
Well, I think back that could I have been more persuasive? I wrote a New England Journal of Medicine article that went into all the R&D things that needed to be done, and a few things were done. A thing called CEPI was created by our foundation and Wellcome Trust and 3 governments. But no, it's really sad that I wasn't persuasive enough, because if the right steps had been taken, we'd have less than 10% of the deaths or economic damage that we're experiencing right now.
Jetzt warnen Sie vor dem Klimawandel. Was lässt Sie denn annehmen, dass die Menschen jetzt mehr auf Sie hören werden?
Well, people can see that the ocean's rising, these natural ecosystems like coral reefs are collapsing, and the scientific data on climate change is very, very strong. Sadly, for climate change, it's not as easy to fix as just creating a vaccine. Here we have to take the entire physical economy, how we manufacture things like steel and cement, how we travel, how we eat. We have to take all of these things and change them so that even as we continue to do those things, we multiply the amount of activity by 0, because we found a green way, a zero emission way to make the electricity or the steel or the cement. And so that's an immense amount of change that we're trying to get done in just 30 years.
Und das erfordert Überzeugungskraft. Wenn ich das richtig gelesen habe in Ihrem Buch mit dem schönen Titel, wie wir die Klimakatastrophe verhindern wollen, dann waren Sie selber so etwas wie ein Klimaskeptiker früher. Sie haben zu denen gehört, die geglaubt haben, das Problem könnte vielleicht von alleine verschwinden. Stimmt das?
No, I was never a skeptic. I wasn't expert in the issue, and it was when I was going to Africa and seeing the lack of electricity there and thinking that, to help those people, even just to keep the vaccines refrigerated, we needed reliable electricity. And so I set out to find out, okay, how can we electrify Africa? And then I knew that I needed to study climate change because that would be a constraint. We couldn't do it with just coal plants. And the more I learned, the more concerned I got. In fact, I have 2 TED Talks. I have a 2010 TED Talk on climate, and then a 2015 talk, which is the one on we're not ready for the next pandemic.
Sie sagen, die Schäden, die wir jetzt durch Corona erleben, sind immens. Sie sagen, die Schäden, die der Klimawandel verursachen wird oder kann, sind noch 5-mal so groß. Können Sie uns das bitte erklären?
Yeah, so you put more greenhouse gas into the atmosphere heats up, and so the weather conditions get worse. And particularly if you're a subsistence farmer, your crop is failing a lot of years, and it's harder and harder to work outdoors. During the summer, you can get days where literally humans can't go outside without risk of dying. And so the ice melting, the wildfires, the failure of the natural ecosystem, it just gets worse and worse as long as you're still emitting any of these gases. And that's why it's fantastic that we have a goal to get to 0 by 2050 and that young people care about this, but we don't have a plan. We don't have how are you going to change the cement and the steel and all these things and still let people, particularly in developing countries, have even a small amount of what we take for granted.
Bei Ihnen klingt das so einfach. Sie sagen, eigentlich müssen wir nur 2 Zahlen kennen, um den Klimawandel zu begreifen. Das eine ist 51 Milliarden und das andere ist die Null. Was sagen uns diese Zahlen?
Yeah, so 51 billion is the tons of CO2 equivalent that we're putting into the atmosphere every year. It's come down a little bit with the pandemic, but surprisingly not much, less than 10% reduction. And so that's, coming from many different sources, that it's not just cars or electricity. It's very, very broad. And 0 is where you have to get to avoid that temperature constantly going up, because the CO2 stays in the atmosphere for thousands of years. And that's what drives that temperature increase. And so sadly, these farmers near the equator, they will suffer the most, malnutrition and death, even though they did the least to cause the problem.
Deutschland hat vor, bis 2050 die CO2-Emissionen auf 80, vielleicht 90% zu reduzieren. Das ist nicht null. Wird das nicht reichen?
Well, the goal has to be zero. Getting to 85% is, great. That means you must have addressed, how you make, meat and all these industrial activities. Sadly, today, if we look at the green premium, the cost of manufacturing with no emissions, it's very, very high. And so those products are basically unaffordable. And so we have to invest in innovation to make the green approach not cost so much more. We've had a lot of focus on the things with the low green premium, which is like the electricity generation or passenger cars. For aviation and cement, we're just not focused on it, even the R&D piece. And so we need to get going and actually prioritize the hard stuff in order to meet the deadline.
Dann nehmen wir doch mal den Flugverkehr. Sie schreiben in Ihrem Buch, dass Sie nicht gerade der beste Botschafter auch für nachhaltiges Leben sind, da Sie große Häuser bewohnen und mit Privatjets fliegen. Sogar zur Klimakonferenz nach Paris sind Sie im Privatjet geflogen. Also, wie kriegen wir denn die Flugemissionen global runter und wie haben Sie das persönlich für sich gelöst, diesen Widerspruch?
Yes, what I've done this year is to eliminate my emissions by buying aviation biofuel. And so it costs 3 times as much, and so I'm spending over $7 million a year to cancel out those emissions. Part of it is I'm paying a company, Climeworks, that does this direct air capture for my non-aviation pieces. And that's showing me, how expensive it is to be completely green. And so now we need to take things like green aviation fuel and drive up the volume like we did with solar so that with invention and competition, that price premium can come down over time. Because after all, we can't ask the less rich countries like India to reduce their activities if that cost of being green means they're denying those basic services to their citizens. And so a key thing to understand is that we won't get rid of all steel and cement. We need to multiply by zero by having a green manufacturing approach.
Als Investor haben Sie viel Kritik erfahren, weil Sie in Ölkonzernen investiert waren. Sind Sie das jetzt überhaupt nicht mehr?
No, I've divested, coal and oil. One thing, though, to make clear is that just divesting stocks doesn't reduce emissions. And so, although it's a fine thing to do, and I did it because I don't want to profit from a delay towards climate progress, which would help those companies, we actually need to invest, not just divest. We need to figure out how to make green hydrogen and, do meat so that there's not these methane emissions from the cows. So, the level of investment, including high-risk investment, is very, very large. And so I'm, in the 2015 Paris climate talks to get an innovation on the agenda, I committed to build what's called Breakthrough Energy Ventures that is funding a lot of these new ideas.
Sie haben schon das Fleisch erwähnt. Sie sind investiert in ein Startup, das eben Fleisch im Labor herstellt. Sie haben erwähnt die CO2-Entnahme aus der Luft, in die Sie ebenfalls investiert haben. Und, das ist in Deutschland besonders aufgefallen, Sie wollen in Atomkraft investieren. In einem Land, in dem die Menschen hauptsächlich skeptisch sind gegenüber dieser Technologie, sagen Sie. Ja, was sagen Sie? Kommen wir ohne Atomkraft auf 0 Emissionen?
Well, the challenge with electricity generation is that we're going to have to grow electricity generation by probably a factor of 3, because as we don't use gasoline for cars, as we don't use natural gas for heating homes and buildings, the electricity demand will go up. And electricity has to be reliable. And so you can get weather over Europe that shuts down the solar and wind for, over a week. So the question is, where is that energy coming from just to keep people warm during those time periods? And there's only two approaches that can work for that scale. One would be a miracle in storage, which we can't assume that grid storage can be done because it's 20 times harder than any battery that we're using for electric cars. The other approach would be to have the nuclear fission, a very new generation whose provable safety and whose economics are far, far better than anything that's been done before. So, I have a company, which I'm only doing for climate change reasons, that has a from-scratch design that is super, super strong in those safety areas. And so, yes, I think we need to invest in both the storage miracle that I've put billions into that and into nuclear and hope that one of them succeeds because if we have neither, then we cannot solve climate change.
Die Menschen hierzulande sagen mehrheitlich, super sicher wurde uns immer gesagt, sei die Kernenergie, das galt bis Tschernobyl und das galt bis Fukushima. Gibt Ihnen das zu denken?
Well, every way that we make energy has safety challenges. Coal kills 100 times as many people per unit of energy. Natural gas kills 10 times as many. Fukushima was a tragedy. It's not in terms of deaths or anything, but just the destruction and the land abandonment. Chernobyl was a terrible accident. That was a reactor designed in the 1950s, was mismanaged. But yes, that should make people wonder, do we want that? Natural gas pipelines blow up. Safety is hard when you're working at this type of scale. And that's why it's tragic that we kept using that old reactor design that had high pressure. The new design requires no operators to do the right thing. It's just by physics that the heat and the radioactive material does not leave the nuclear plant. And so the latest science, including digital modeling, needed to be applied in a from-scratch way.
Bleibt das Problem des strahlenden Mülls und der strahlt weit länger, als Sie und ich und unsere Kinder und unsere Enkel auf dieser Welt sein werden. Ist das ein Argument, das Sie überzeugen könnte?
You're right. That's another challenge that people need to feel comfortable with is can we geologically store that so no humans, even millions of years from now, will be exposed to that. And because of our ability to dig what are called boreholes, and because these new reactors create so much less waste, that's another thing that we have clear answers for. But even once we build this demo plant that will take another 5 years, I don't know if we'll be able to convince people of that. But they'll have to choose. If we don't have a storage miracle, do they want to get rid of the climate change and we have a big problem that will be destroying the natural ecosystems and human existence near the equator.
Wenn Sie mit Angela Merkel sprechen, unserer Bundeskanzlerin, sind Sie auch voll des Lobes. Vor 10 Jahren ist Angela Merkel aus der zivilen Atomkraft ausgestiegen. War das ein Fehler? Würden Sie ihr das so sagen?
Well, the issue of whether to keep or get rid of the current nuclear, which is called third generation nuclear, I'm not involved in that. A lot of money was put into building it, but people don't feel comfortable with that. That's fine. Only thing I would say is please keep an open mind that a completely new design based on physics principles in terms of the economics and the safety and the waste, that you at least be willing to look at it once it's proven to work. That's all I would say about nuclear at this point.
Sie waren bei der Entwicklung eben dieser neuen Atomkraftwerke schon weit, auch investiert. Sie hatten auch schon Kooperation mit China angedacht. Dann kam Donald Trump ins Weiße Haus und begann einen Handelskrieg, der so ziemlich alles unmöglich machte, was auch diese Aktivitäten anging. Wenn Sie jetzt mal nach 4 Jahren Donald Trump auf die Bilanz dieser Politik America First schauen, hat das Amerika eigentlich mehr geschadet oder genutzt?
Well, in terms of innovation in nuclear, this company TerraPower had a joint venture and a site and was very far along doing it together with China because they want to get rid of their coal plants. The bad relations meant that was canceled, but fortunately now the American government gave a $4 billion project award to TerraPower to build that demonstration plant in the United States. So if that works well, gets all the safety review that it's dramatically safer, then it'll be available to the world as part of a climate solution if we don't have the storage miracle.
Bleibt der zweite Teil der Frage, vielleicht wollen Sie darüber nicht so gerne reden, aber Sie sagten gerade selber, es kommt darauf an, ob man jemanden vertraut. Haben Sie Donald Trump als Präsidenten vertraut?
Well, I certainly disagreed publicly with a lot of things done under the Trump administration, most notably withdrawing from the WHO and not working with other countries on the pandemic, saying that, they didn't want to help other countries with vaccines. We did convince the Congress at the very end of his administration, not him, but the Congress did put a down payment, $4 billion forward for this COVAX to buy vaccines for the developing countries. So, we struggled. Our issues were not a priority under an American First rubric. And so we're more optimistic both about our global health work and the climate work under a Biden administration.
Sie sind sehr diplomatisch, was Donald Trump angeht. Ich würde es trotzdem gerne wissen. Sie sind beide Geschäftsleute. Donald Trump glaubt, er ist ein sehr erfolgreicher Geschäftsmann. Ich wollte trotzdem gerne wissen, glauben Sie, diese 4 Jahre haben Amerika vorangebracht oder geschadet?
Overall, they hurt the U.S. a great deal.
Joe Biden und Kamala Harris sind sofort wieder, das haben Sie gesagt, dem Klimaabkommen von Paris beigetreten. Sie sind wieder in die WHO gegangen. Es verknüpften sich mit dieser Präsidentschaft sehr viele Hoffnungen in außenpolitischen Fragen, aber auch in Amerika selbst. Glauben Sie, dieses Team hat eine Chance, die tiefe Spaltung Amerikas zu überwinden?
Well, certainly the new administration will listen to experts. They won't put crackpots on the coronavirus task force. They'll, have a message of leadership about wearing masks and being willing to admit that the pandemic is a big problem, not always underplaying it like it's going to go away. So in some respects, just pure competence, pure honesty. There's no doubt this administration will bring us together and bring the world together more than the last 4 years. There's some tough issues about, taxes and spending that, will continue to be divisive, but a lot of competence and focus on the issues as opposed to, attacking people personally and creating divides. So I'm hopeful, but, it's not a magic solution. It's just a competent administration.
Mr. Gates, Sie nehmen viel Einfluss auf die Dinge, die passieren in dieser Welt über Ihre Stiftung. Sie sind zum Beispiel der größte Privatspender der Weltgesundheitsorganisation WHO. Sie bestimmen also mit, was auf diesem Planeten passiert, aber Sie sind nie gewählt worden. Sie haben kein Mandat dafür. Haben Sie sich jemals überlegt, ob Sie in die Politik wollen?
No, I don't think I can contribute by actually being a politician. I think by funding science, like vaccine. Well, my role is to make sure we get a vaccine for HIV and tuberculosis, and to finish polio, and then go after malaria. And these are I need decades of time to make sure our foundation has the best people and the best partnerships. And so that's what I like to do. That's what I'm good at doing. Going out and giving political speeches, I would be terrible at that. So I'll work with those politicians as much as possible, because the government policies, the government money, whether it's global health or climate change, we need the governments. They are critical to solve these problems.
Mr. Gates, es gibt eine fantastische Netflix-Dokumentation über Ihr Leben und Ihr Wirken, und darin verrät Ihre Frau Folgendes, dass Sie, bevor Sie geheiratet haben, auf einem Whiteboard eine Pro- und Kontraliste gemacht haben. Also was sprach für und was sprach gegen diese Hochzeit. Stimmt das? Und was stand auf den beiden Seiten?
I think I did. Well, the pros have been, phenomenal. Including having 3 amazing kids. So it's almost funny that I was hesitating. I was so committed to working long hours, but over time I become a little more normal, taking weekends off, taking some vacations. So, marrying Melinda's helped me mature, made me a far better person overall, and, having a family's been amazing.
Sie wirken wie jemand, der immer sehr zielgerichtet war. Waren Sie immer schon so seit Ihrer frühen Kindheit, oder hatten Sie auch Phasen, wo Sie ein bisschen sich haben treiben lassen?
Well, the software career, I had the dream of personal computing and what became the internet when I was quite young, together with Paul Allen. And so I was really maniacal about that, and that's really all I did in my 20s and into my 30s. But since then, I've been able to, look more broadly, particularly in the work of the foundation. So I was very intense in my 20s and 30s. Now I take more time off, and I look into more issues, but I'm very passionate about the work of the foundation.
Ihre Schwester hat über diese frühe Phase, über ihre Teenagerzeit, wo Sie ja auch schon programmiert haben, gesagt, Sie und Ihre Freunde, Sie waren so ein bisschen nerdig. Also sind Sie ein Nerd gewesen, und sind Sie es heute nicht mehr?
No, I'm certainly a nerd. I like reading complicated things, and, some of the obscure books about climate and how you make steel, things like that. Yes, I'm very nerdy, less than I was, where I would just disappear and read books for days at a time. But no, I don't view that as a negative description.
Sie haben, als Sie 17 waren, die Schule mal kurz unterbrochen, weil Sie einen Job hatten in Vancouver als Programmierer. Dann haben Sie Harvard abgebrochen, eine der renommiertesten Universitäten überhaupt. Ist das ein Ratschlag, den Sie Ihren Kindern geben würden? Beendet keine Ausbildung, unterbrecht die Schule, dann werdet ihr erfolgreich?
I think it's a crazy idea in 99.9% of the cases. Unless you have a vision that you feel has to be executed right away, and it's so compelling, you want to work on it night and day. I think it's great to graduate. And in my case, I wanted to be the first with Microsoft, and we did. We got in there early, and yet I'm still kind of a student. I'm watching courses all the time, so it's not like I missed the courses. But college was fun, but it was time to go get Microsoft started, so I had to leave.
Ich habe einen 14-jährigen Sohn und es fällt mir sehr schwer, ihm zu erklären, wie die Welt ausgesehen hat in der Zeit, in der Sie Microsoft erfunden haben, wie wir telefoniert haben, wie wir kommuniziert haben, die Autos, die wir gefahren sind, die technischen Möglichkeiten, die wir hatten. Es ist nicht mehr wirklich verständlich zu machen. Sie sind der Pionier dieser digitalen Revolution. Gibt es irgendetwas darin in den letzten Jahrzehnten, wo Sie selbst sagen, das ist nicht gut gelaufen, das macht selbst Sie unsicher?
Well, I'm watching my kids who are more natural, using all these new applications, and how do they track the news, and how do they use the different social networks, and so they're keeping me up to date now about these things. Certainly, the breakthroughs, do come with some downsides, like these conspiracy theories that spread so quickly because they're kind of titillating. And so it's even faster than back in the days of print. And so how we strike a balance from this ease of communication and the kind of crazy stuff like Holocaust denial or vaccine attacks or conspiracy theories, we're still figuring that out. So always, there's some challenge. That as you make these advances, how do you shape it in the right way?
Sie haben gesagt, Sie haben Ihre Vision verwirklicht. Was bleibt dann an Visionen, wenn Sie zum Beispiel hören, dass Elon Musk nicht nur zum Mars will, sondern noch dieses Jahr Zivilisten in den Weltall bringen möchte? Wäre das was für Sie? Würden Sie einsteigen?
No, I'm not a Mars person. As long as we have malaria, TB, HIV, 5 million kids dying before the age of 5, almost entirely in poor countries. What grabs me is solving that problem, getting rid of those diseases. So it's a different passion, and I'm busy. It'll take the rest of my life working on these global health issues.
2050, wenn Sie die CO2-Emissionen auf Null sehen möchten, sind Sie 95 Jahre alt. Glauben Sie, an Ihrem Geburtstag wird sich diese Vision erfüllt haben?
I hope we will, and I think we will. My book lays out a plan of how to accelerate these innovations and how to bring the green premiums down. I hope I'm alive to see it. It's going to be the hardest thing mankind has ever done. It's not easy, and people who think it's easy, we need to really convince them of how hard it is because of all the different sources. But yes, I've seen innovation perform miracles, and if we get the incentives and policies right, we'll see that. And we can solve climate. And so the idealism of this young generation can be validated if we really have realistic plans.
Dann wollen wir doch sehen, dass es soweit kommt. Herzlichen Dank für dieses Gespräch nach Seattle. Herzlichen Dank, Bill Gates.
Thank you.
Das war Maischberger die Woche extra. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen. Bis zum nächsten Mal.